We turn to Plato's Euthyphro. It's a dialogue which was written by Plato when he was younger, and it focuses on the philosophy and the ideas of his teacher Socrates. For this reason, it's called a Socratic dialogue, along with other dialogues such as the Crito and the Apology, some of which we'll be reading. And it's distinct from other dialogues which develop later on in Plato's life, where Plato sort of injects his own views. But usually within Plato's dialogues, we will see that Socrates is the main character and protagonist. I urge you to watch the biographical videos about these two philosophers in order to obtain more information. So let's move on to the dialogue itself. The dialogue is about the question, what is piety? Remember, philosophy asks questions, and this particular dialogue asks this question. It is a superficial issue of the dialogue, as we'll see, because what Plato's really interested in doing is something more pedagogical in nature. These dialogues were written for his students, and he wants to demonstrate a particular method of asking questions and providing answers. And that's really the purpose of this dialogue. And so we're going to look at this. Also, the dialogue will actually bring up some interesting moral issues, particularly the Euthyphro dilemma, which we'll talk about. So what is piety? First of all, etymologically, we should look at this word because in Latin, it's a bit different from the original Greek term. The Latin word piety, pietas, refers to dutiful conduct and to the notion of religious devotion. We call someone who's religious sort of pious, right? In Greek, it's different. It comes from the words eusevia and asevia, ev, or meaning well, and a meaning not, and sevia referring to proper relations. So well-relationed in eusevia and not well-relationed. So piety means you're well-relationed, impious means you're not well-relationed. And the relation here has to do with the individual and society, and also the individual and the gods. So someone who is pious has proper relations with persons that they encounter in society, and you see examples here, and also their individual and in relation to the gods, which will be the main topic of this dialogue. So the setting is of the dialogue. Socrates meets a young man, Euthyphro, at the court of the king magistrate, the Archon Vasilevs, that's called. And it turns out that Socrates is himself being charged with impiety. So this is kind of where the issue comes up, but we'll see it also comes up in relation to Euthyphro himself. The charge here kind of stems from a long history of Socrates in relation to individuals in the state and the particular actions which Socrates has been undertaking, which you'll want to read about within his biography. So Euthyphro himself is a priest or seer, the mantis, originally from Naxos. Not much else is known about him. Naxos is an island not too far, a good distance, but not too far from Athens, in what's called the Cyclades. So Euthyphro informs Socrates that he's prosecuting his own father on the murder of a slave. So this is important here because we're talking about well relations. And remember, part of good relations is the relations that a son owes to their father. Okay, so the story is that the father accidentally kills a slave who actually intentionally killed or kills another slave in a drunken fit. So the slave kills someone, the father ties him up, throws him in a pit, leaves to see what happens, what to do, and the slave dies in the interim. Euthyphro thinks this is bad, and basically bad enough to prosecute his own father. Socrates, contrarily, thinks that, well, Euthyphro, your actions are impious. You shouldn't be prosecuting your own father. Perhaps you should at least get someone else to do it. And Euthyphro responds, well, both you, Socrates, as well as the masses, really don't know what piety is. And he makes the claim, a bold claim Euthyphro makes, I know what piety is, as well as impiety. And Socrates, ever the conversationalist and debater, raises the philosophical question, and he's really going to antagonize Euthyphro here and show him that he actually doesn't know what piety is. He says, well, Euthyphro, then tell me, what is piety? Okay, so what we're going to see here is that the dialogue is going to move in what's called these kind of spirals. And a spiral is a circle that sort of moves out, right, as you can see the cursor here. Okay, so and the spiral will be that Euthyphro will offer definitions, Socrates will offer objections, and it will spiral out into new definitions and objections. And the idea is that our understanding of the problem is broadening, and we're moving from the particular case to the more general case to the universal case. And it's the universal case that Plato is looking for. Now let's look at this first definition and see how this works. So definition 1, the pious is what I am doing now, prosecuting a wrongdoer. He gives evidence, and it's from Hesiod's Theogony, the kind of mythology, religious mythology of the Greeks. And in this, Zeus, the great god Zeus, is the kind of king of the Olympian gods of Greece. He bounds and castrates his own father Kronos, who is attempting to swallow his brothers and sisters, in fact. And so he says, look, Zeus did this to his father. I can do this to my father, so because I know what piety is. So Socrates objects, and he says, look, and I'm going to give you a kind of analogy here. He says, what you're telling me is basically if I were to ask someone who's doing something, well, what is the nature of the thing you're doing? And they say to me, well, it's just what I'm doing. Then basically you've given me no information, or at least you've only given me information about the individual or particular case. And this is what Euthyphro is given. He's given just the particular case of, well, piety is just this thing I'm doing. But what we want to do is spiral outward and figure out, well, what is the universal, the general case? If you're going to give me a definition of piety, I want to know how this can apply to all particular acts that we call pious, not just to your act, Euthyphro, that you're calling pious. Okay, and so this is what the objection, the basis of Socrates' objection is. This in turn leads to the second definition. And notice how Euthyphro becomes more general. He says the pious is not just what I'm doing, but the pious is that which is dear to the gods. In other words, what the gods love, what the gods hold in esteem. If we do this, then we're being pious. If not, we're being impious. So Socrates again will object. And remember, Plato is trying to demonstrate a pedagogy here of how we're going to try to define these things. So the objection here, and to understand this, you have to kind of look at Greek mythology. In Greek mythology, we see that the gods are kind of often in disagreement. For example, Zeus, the great king of the gods, is married to Hera, and Zeus often goes around sleeping with maidens, and sometimes he does it and they don't want him to, so it's rape. But Hera, his wife, is not happy with this, of course, and so what we see is that Zeus thinks it's okay to sleep around, but Hera does not. So what we see then, and this is Socrates' first statement. Now notice here we have an argument, and the argument is that we have starting statements that leads to a conclusion. I will call these starting statements premises, and the last statement is always the conclusion. Just keep that in mind because I'll be using those words. So he says the gods are often in a state of disagreement, right? Hera and Zeus disagreeing about him sleeping around. But discord is often moral, right? You shouldn't be sleeping around. You ought not to. And we use the word ought, that's often meant in a moral way. You ought not to kill, right? So you ought not to sleep around. 3, what is loved by one god may therefore be hated by another, right? Zeus loves sleeping around, and Hera hates it. So, obviously, it seems that what is pious to one god, sleeping around, may be impious to another, that you shouldn't be. So you're committing adultery. So, obviously, this must be wrong. Piety can't be dear to all the gods because the gods are disagreeing. So, Euthyphro gets a little ruffled, but he responds and he says, okay, Socrates, on some issues only, the gods are disagreeing, but on some issues the gods are agreeing, and they're in full accord, and the example is murder. And so he reformulates his definition. Now, notice this. He's going to move from the particular case, piety is what I'm doing, to the more general case, piety is dear to what is dear to the gods, and it's actually to some of the gods, to the full universal case, the pious is that which is dear to all of the gods. And at this point, Socrates raises the famous Euthyphro dilemma through a question. So the dilemma is a moral or theological issue also about how morality exists relative to a rational law-giving agent, and usually it's formulated in relation to God or gods, but you can formulate it in other ways. Okay, it depends on the context. So here's the dilemma. Do the gods love that which is pious? Right? And the issue is in itself pious. Pious just for the sake of piety. Or is the pious simply that which the gods love? Okay? Let's restate this so we can understand what this means. Okay? So do the gods love piety because piety is itself good, or is piety good because the gods love it? Again, and I'm going to put it in a Judeo-Christian context. Are God's commandments in themselves good, or are they good only because God commands them? Right? So we have the 10 Commandments, and one of them is thou shalt not kill. Now let me ask you this question. If God were to say it's okay to kill, does that mean it's now okay to kill? Or is it the case that it's always wrong to kill, and God commands it because it's always wrong? So this is the basis of the dilemma. In other words, do the gods love piety because what is pious, in other words, what is honorable, what is esteemable, is itself something that's lovable? Or is the honorable, esteemable that we call piety something that is that only because the gods love it? Just like the case of God commanding with murder. Is murder wrong because God commands it, or is it wrong whether or not God commands it? This is the dilemma. So Euthyphro agrees with the former case. He says the gods love piety for the sake of itself, for its own sake. And I'll use this notion in itself. And when I say in itself, I mean it's good just for its own sake and not because of any relation it has to anyone else, whether a person or the gods. This leads to the next definition. The pious is that which is in itself, in other words, without the gods, dear to the gods. In other words, it's lovable just for the sake of itself, and that's why the gods love it. Okay? So, Socrates has an objection ready for him, and he says, well, look, Euthyphro, if that's the case, then really nothing has been said about piety. Why? Because you've just said, well, piety is just that which the gods love and that which is dear in itself, but you really haven't explained what it is that the gods love and why. So do they love the honorable? Do they love the bold and the courageous? Why do they love that? Okay, you haven't explained this. At this point, Euthyphro complains. And perhaps you might have some complaints, but we'll just keep those on the side. He says the argument is running around in circles. In fact, this is what Plato wants. He wants to give this because he wants to teach us how to raise these questions and define things. But he compares it to the statues of Daedalus. So Daedalus was this great craftsman who would, apparently it's in mythology only, create these statues that were so lifelike that you could actually mistake them for a human being, and so it seemed that at night they might walk around when no one's looking at them, kind of like these ancient robots, right? That's kind of the idea. So he's saying your argument is like a robot that just keeps running around and won't stay in place, and we can never find the answer. After a few bits of discussion, a sort of digression, where Socrates discusses a poem, he injects, Plato does, through the mouth of Socrates, an assumption. He says piety is a part of justice, and this is important because it will lead to the next definition. And now, an assumption is a statement that is accepted without proof. So Plato doesn't offer any basis for this. He just says, well, this is the case. Okay? And the idea is that piety implies justice. So wherever there's piety, there's justice, but justice does not always imply piety. So when we have justice, we don't necessarily have piety. For example, if I give equal shares of food to people, this is just, right? Or if I give, people who are working the same amount of hours with the same experience, the same pay, that's just. It's not necessarily pious, though, right? In that sense. So Euthyphro accepts this. This leads to the final definition. Piety is the part of justice concerned with the care of the gods. All right? And from this, another conclusion is drawn that piety must involve some form of knowledge about how to sacrifice and pray, right? Because to care for the gods is to pray to them, is to offer sacrifices to them, to keep them in mind, etc. This is the basic idea. Now, this leads to the final objection, where he says, well, then piety must be some kind of skill at trading with the gods, right? You're trading for benefits. So I pray to the gods, and I ask for long life. I pray to the gods, and I ask for success in a job, right? And this must be piety. But he says that such gifts can only be beneficial insofar as they are pleasing to the gods, right? So prayer must be pleasing to the gods, sacrifice must be pleasing to the gods. So then, what this definition says is that piety is nothing but that which is pleasing to all of the gods. And we could say in itself or whatever, but what we've seen is that the argument has again run around in a circle as Daedalus, and even though Socrates attempts to renew the argument and continue the process, Euthyphro has simply said, I've had enough. And he says, some other time. Okay, so this is the end of the dialogue. Again, the dialogue, you'll notice as you finish it, there's no solution to it. And you can ask, well, what's the point? And the point is precisely what we've just done, what we've just gone through. We've gone through a process of intellectual, philosophical interrogation where we've raised a question, what is piety? And we've gone from our naive notions about piety, that, well, piety is just what I'm doing, to a more full answer, which is that piety is some sort of universal love, that is something that is dear to the gods. And notice that we haven't finished it, because Plato's not done. He's not going to give us the answer. He wants us to look on our own. And the relevance of this seeking for our moral questions is when we start to ask the question, what is right and wrong? Well, we can say, well, the right and wrong is just what my parents are doing or just what my society is doing. Notice that you're answering it just in the way that Euthyphro is, and in fact, you haven't given an answer.